So, you've got your monologue, you've researched your monologue, you know what's going on. How do you break it down to make sure that you really understand it? Well, first of all, remember that every monologue, just like every person, is a little bit different. So while there are some good strategies that I'm going to model for you here, not every strategy that I'm going to show you is going to apply, but most of them are. So, like I mentioned in a previous video, the most important word in a Shakespearean monologue is always at the end of the verse line. Now, what does that mean? Well, the verse line is the line of rhythm. So you'll notice that when your monologue is on the page, every line is a certain number of syllables long. Specifically, usually 10 syllables. Sometimes 11, but usually it's 10. But if the most important word is always at the end of the line, then my first step is, depending on if I'm working with paper, if you've printed out your monologue and you're working on paper, that's fine. If you don't have it on paper and you want to type it up so that you can mark on it, that's fine too. I'm going to use the typed version so that I can share it with you more effectively. But the first thing that I'm going to do is bold the last word at the end of each line. And if you're on paper, I would suggest that you circle it. Now, why am I doing this? And I'm not going to do the whole thing right now, because it tells me how I'm going to shape. And when you are looking at the monologue, remember that as he was writing with a pen, the last word at the end of the line is what he wrote. It's what was singing in his head as he picked up the pen, moved his arm back to the left, and started writing again. So, listen to just this. Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention! A kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment. But pardon, gentles, all the flat, unraised spirits that have dared. Right? Do you hear how each word that is bolded, I am providing just the tiniest bit of emphasis to? I'm either lifting my pitch up a little bit higher, or I'm increasing my volume a little bit, or I'm punching it a little bit more with my tone. But one way or another, those words matter. So make sure that you are hitting them. Don't let them drop. Now, as you're working through your monologue, you're going to notice, again, it depends on the monologue, but you're going to notice things like this, where it's the word leashed, but there's an apostrophe in it instead of an E. You might be sitting there and you might be thinking to yourself, well, why in the world is there not just an ED, right? Leashed. Well, because sometimes in Shakespeare's monologues, he does things called a voiced vowel syllable. For example, anybody who's tackling a Romeo or a Juliet monologue, chances are pretty good you have to say banished instead of banished. Why does he do that? In order to make it fit the rhythm of the line. I'm not going to talk a lot about rhythm in this video, either because I've already talked about it in a previous video or because I'm going to talk to you about it in a separate video, and I don't want to overwhelm you in one video. So, leashed, anytime you see him drop a vowel and put in an apostrophe, that's called an elision. E-double-L-I-S-I-O-N, an elision. It's basically him accordioning the word and making it one syllable instead of two. So, leashed in like hounds. Looking for any others. Oh, let's see. Oh, yes, indeed. There's one down here. Printing their proud hooves i' the receiving earth. Now, it's not I. It's not printing their proud hooves I the receiving earth. And chances are a lot of you have this one. Anytime he has in the, he will often remove the N and put in the apostrophe and wants you to squish it down to make it i the receiving or i the middle. Why? Again, because he doesn't want you to focus on things like prepositions and stuff like that. That's not what he's focused on. He wants you to get to the juicy stuff, the nouns and the verbs. That's where the power of the language is. Which now sets me up to talk about the caveman exercise. The caveman exercise works like this. You go through the entire speech, circling or underlining or bolding, if yours isn't typed up. What are the words that are the most necessary if you were a caveman for the audience to understand? Meaning you can't say every word. You can only pick a few. So here's how this works. Oh, muse, fire, ascend, brightest heaven invention. Kingdom, stage, princes, act, monarchs, behold, swelling scene. Then, warlike Harry, like himself, assume port Mars. At heels, leashed in like hounds, famine, sword, and fire, crouch, employment. Okay, so now I'm only going to, for the caveman exercise, I'm only going to say the words that I have either circled, underlined, or bolded. O muse, fire, ascend brightest heaven invention. Kingdom, stage, princes, act, monarchs, behold, swelling scene. Then warlike Harry himself assume port of Mars, and at heels leashed hounds, famine, sword, fire, crouch, employment. And you hear, in the caveman exercise, it teaches you to focus on the most important words that the audience needs to hear to understand, so that you as the actor know, hey, I've got to spend my emphasis on these words very carefully, because if the audience doesn't hear these words, they aren't going to know what to hear. So now, still bearing in mind my emphasis, I'm going to put all the text back and I'm going to try it again. Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention. A kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment. So if you listen there, what I'm emphasizing are the most important words, the things that paint the picture, the nouns, the verbs, and all of the imagery. And it's the imagery that gives him, and the language, and you, as the actors performing your own monologues, the power. Okay. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about, and this is the reason why it's important for you to practice articulation and vocal exercises, is the power of the language itself. Literally, the power of the sounds. It's weird for us in a 21st century context to have to think about how words sound and how words make us feel. But in order for this next part to really make sense, I'm going to make a video of me talking into the camera, not just this screen, so that you can watch me as I talk through it.